Don't you dare lecture me on integrity. Kellyanne Conway's voice ripped through the studio like shrapnel. Her finger jabbed the air with every syllable, her eyes wide, locked in a mix of fury and desperation. The set went quiet. Even the blinking cameras seemed to hesitate. Across from her, Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. Not a blink, not a twitch, just a steady, unreadable calm. The host shifted awkwardly in his chair, glancing off composure. Okay, let's keep it civil, but Kellyanne wasn't finished. You sit there in your little power suit pretending to be the moral compass of the party, but you've been here 5 minutes. I've been in the trenches. You have no idea what real leadership looks like. The tension thickened. Crockett still said nothing. She's a lightweight, Conway snapped, now addressing the panel. Not even pretending to speak to Jasmine. No experience, just another angry face for the cameras. And that's when the camera caught it. A blink, a single blink from Jasmine Crockett. Not annoyance, not rage, just disappointment. She finally turned her head, slowly, toward Kellyanne. Still calm, still unbothered. Are you finished? 3 words, but it was how she said them, like someone speaking to a storm that never scared her in the first place. The host leaned forward, sensing the shift. The panelists glanced at each other. The silence was louder than Conway's scream. Jasmine's hands folded gently on the desk in front of her. Because if you are, I'd like to respond. Not for you, but for every woman who's ever had to endure exactly what you just did and still rise the next day with her dignity intact. Kellyanne opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Crockett didn't wait. You scream to be heard. I speak to be understood. That's the difference. The studio air cracked. One of the producers audibly gasped. Social media hadn't even caught up yet, but inside that room, everyone knew they'd just witnessed something rare, something honest. But what Jasmine says next would send shockwaves far beyond that studio. The show was called Capital Clash, a no-holds-barred political roundtable that billed itself as where DC meets the dinner table. It aired live every Thursday night to a national audience, but tonight, the stakes were higher than usual. Midterms loomed, social tensions simmered, and the producers knew exactly what they were doing when they booked Kellyanne Conway and Jasmine Crockett on the same panel. That it was a collision course. Kellyanne, once the steely architect of Trump's messaging machine, had become a kind of political ghost. She hovered around the edges of the conservative media sphere, desperate to stay relevant, feeding on outrage to keep her name in the headlines. But the playbook was wearing thin. Her talking points felt recycled, her jabs more desperate than sharp. And across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, new blood, but not new to battle. A first-term congresswoman from Texas, Crockett had quickly built a reputation as the sharpest voice in the room. Not because she shouted the loudest, but because she knew when not to. Former civil rights attorney, daughter of the South, defender of facts in an age of fiction. She wasn't just in the conversation, she was starting to define it. And that terrified people like Kellyanne. But this wasn't just a generational clash. It wasn't just about insider versus outsider, or experience versus freshness. It was about power. Old power versus rising power. White legacy versus black resilience. Jasmine wasn't supposed to hold her ground. She was supposed to be rattled by the volume, thrown off by the gaslighting. She was supposed to be another talking head in a neatly packaged segment, quotable, dismissible, forgettable. Instead, she became the mirror America didn't want to look into. Millions of viewers were watching live, but tens of millions more would see the clips within hours. TikTok would break it down frame by frame. Twitter, still clinging to its relevance, would erupt in threads dissecting Jasmine's tone, Kellyanne's body language, the way the host fumbled to regain control. News anchors would later call it fiery, pundits would call it disrespectful. But for the people who needed to see it most, it was something else entirely. It was familiar. Because how many women, how many black women had been spoken over, shouted down, or dismissed with a smirk, only to be told they were too emotional if they dared push back. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard, and in doing so, she challenged the entire architecture of how power is performed on television. That this wasn't just a debate, it became a defining cultural moment. Kellyanne Conway didn't start in the chaos. She helped create it. Long before she became a household name, she was a pollster, sharp, methodical, and underestimated. She spoke in data points and sound bites, a woman who knew how to take the temperature of a room and spin it into strategy. But it wasn't until Donald Trump tapped her to manage his 2016 campaign, the first woman ever to do so successfully, that she stepped into the spotlight. And then, she owned it. She wasn't just a spokesperson, she was a stormfront. Conway was everywhere, deflecting scandals, rewriting timelines, redefining language. Who could forget the moment she coined the phrase alternative facts? In 4 syllables, she gave the entire administration permission to lie with impunity. She didn't just bend the truth, she snapped it in half and smiled as it fell. On cable news, she was a force. Charming when needed, brutal when cornered. Hosts didn't interview her, they survived her. Her style was pure chaos. Pivot before answering, laugh off confrontation, interrupt with faux outrage. She weaponized confusion. And it worked. For years. But something changed after Trump left office. The cameras didn't follow her quite the same. The headlines shrank. Even the scandals she stirred felt smaller. There was no Oval Office to orbit, no campaign war room to command. She drifted from gig to gig, panels, podcast appearances, op-eds aimed at rallying a base that was starting to look past her. She wasn't shaping the message anymore. She was chasing it. Still, the playbook remained the same. Deflect, dominate, dismiss. If the facts hurt, question their source. If the audience doubts, smirk and say they're being emotional. And if a woman dares to stand up to you, talk louder, interrupt more, and accuse her of being angry. That was the formula. But formulas age, and Kellyanne was starting to show the cracks. Her contradictions caught up with her. One moment she'd denounce chaos, the next she'd excuse it. One day, she'd criticize Trump's behavior, the next she'd double down in his defense. Even her memoir was a maze of backpedals and rhetorical sleight of hand. The public began to notice. The smirk seemed smugger. The outrage felt performative. She was still wielding the same tactics, but the room was less willing to follow her lead. Yet, despite it all, she believed she still had the upper hand. That when the cameras turned on, she could still dominate the moment. That if she raised her voice and sharpened her tone, she could rattle anyone into submission. That's why she didn't see Jasmine Crockett coming. Because Jasmine wasn't just another guest. She wasn't another liberal pundit eager to debate policy points and trade zingers. Jasmine wasn't there to play. She was there to stand in truth. And Conway's tactics, they depended on the game. On people taking the bait. On flustered hosts and guests who didn't know how to pivot from her pivots. But Jasmine didn't pivot. She didn't flinch. She didn't even raise her voice. She just waited. Kellyanne had walked into that studio expecting a fight. She knew how to win, but she didn't realize her opponent wasn't throwing punches, she was pulling back curtains. Because what happens when that old playbook meets someone who refuses to play the game? Jasmine Crockett never planned to be famous, she planned to be useful. Born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, Crockett was the kind of girl who saw everything, who watched how the world moved around her, who noticed how easily power passed by the people who needed it most. Her parents weren't political insiders, they were working class. They knew the price of being overlooked, and they made sure Jasmine didn't grow up ignoring it. She studied hard, listened harder, and when it came time to choose her path, she picked law not because she loved the idea of courtrooms, but because she hated watching people be punished for not knowing how to navigate them. Texas became her battleground. She set up shop as a civil rights and criminal defense attorney, defending those the system forgot. People who didn't have the money to buy justice. People who'd been talked over, misrepresented, chewed up, and discarded. People who reminded her of home. But Crockett didn't just represent the vulnerable. She understood them. She knew what it meant to be doubted before you even opened your mouth. She'd felt that weight walking into courtrooms, young black female, and watched the assumptions stack against her before the first gavel dropped out, so she sharpened her mind like a blade. Her reputation grew quietly, case by case. She wasn't flashy, didn't chase the cameras, didn't craft slogans, but prosecutors noticed her name. Judges respected her work. And the people she defended, they remembered how she stood up for them, fully, fearlessly, and without condescension. That then came the protests, the pandemic, the breaking point. America was being pulled apart in plain sight. Injustice wasn't hiding anymore, it was live. And Jasmine Crockett, a lawyer grounded in facts and fire, looked around and realized courtrooms weren't enough. She stepped into politics not with a megaphone but with a mission.